Welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, available on Pacifica Radio and iTunes and Progressive Radio Network and SoundCloud and Stitcher. And I am the author of The Bottom Up Revolution, coming out May 22nd this year. And I like to look at people who have different takes on the top-down and bottom-up world, which is very big and broad in terms of what I can cover because of that. My guest for this show is Jean Leslie. She's a board-certified physician, MD, and she's a hospice geriatrician. She has a new book out, Charming Cheaters. Protect yourself from the sociopaths, psychopaths, and sexopaths in your life. And she was victimized by a sociopathic sex addict who embezzled over $700,000 from her medical practice. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Boy, sounds like a horrible experience you had there.
It was. It definitely started as a nightmare. And I actually started writing as a form of therapy to figure out how I could have been so gullible as to be duped by a sociopath.
And your first writing was a novel, right?
It was.
What was the name of it?
So the sociopath who embezzled all of the money, while she was embezzling, she was also on the Ashley Madison cheater site. And she was dating 5 different married men at the same time, while none of them knew about each other, including her husband.
Wow.
And I tried to sue her and was told, basically that even though I had a very strong case, I was probably going to win, that in cases like these, she will have spent the money. She'll declare bankruptcy at the end. The banks get their money first. And I would basically have a 6-figure legal bill and a holly victory. So I dropped the suit and I wrote her stories instead. Well, fictionalized, of course. Everything has been changed. In fact, I wrote the book under a pseudonym, Nicole Kelly, MD. Just in order to keep everything fictionalized, keep everybody's identity, hidden and personal. But it was my way of figuring out what happened to me and who she truly was, and also to reveal to the world how the inner mind of a sociopath truly works, because this is how she thinks.
Okay, and you also, on your new book, you've also used the pseudonym, and we had a conversation before we started this interview, and you decided to use your real name, Jean Leslie. Why?
Well, I kind of feel like I am on a mission to teach the public to recognize sociopaths and psychopaths. And sociopaths and psychopaths, the way they interact with the world is they wear masks. They pretend to be somebody else. And I don't know, it seems almost hypocritical for me to be using a pseudonym when my whole point is accountability and transparency.
So why were you using the pseudonym?
I've been advised it decreased my liability risk. I also wanted to keep my author and my work life separate, although recently my work life has now discovered my books. So the secret is out, and I'm comfortable with who I am and what I've written and the message that I want to put out there. So it's time to stop hiding and announce to the world who I am and the message that I want to reveal to everyone.
All right. Well, congratulations on coming out.
Thank you.
So the first thing is you talk about psychopaths and sociopaths, and just the idea that there are differences is a controversial issue. I've done a whole lot of interviews and writing about psychopaths and sociopaths, and some experts say that there is no such thing as a sociopath, or that others say it's the same. You've got a somewhat unique take on it.
I do.
What's your take, and what's your definition of a psychopath and a sociopath, and how are they different?
Absolutely. And this is all part of my reason in offering this different, idea on how to define them is because I think we're all getting lost in the definitions. I think the fact that there are people who do not have a conscience and have no empathy is being lost in the semantics of what we call them. Because in reality, the labels are not important. if someone has multiple characteristics of a sociopath, psychopath, then we need to be aware of them. We don't need to have gone through the PCLR and gone through the 6 to 8 hours it takes. Yeah, I saw you without conscience behind you.
Yeah, this is the guy who wrote the book, this PCL. Say what the PCLR is.
Yeah, and actually I took the official training. I am a trained medical professional to give the PCLR, and Dr. Hare was actually involved in the training.
And what's the PCLR?
Yes.
What is it? Explain what it is.
It's the Psychopath Checklist revised. So basically there are 20 items, and you rank everything 0, 1, or 2, depending on how often they show that trait. The reason that it was revolutionary is that Dr. Hare doesn't rely on a personal questionnaire. So personal questionnaires are inherently troublesome in this population because they're pathological liars. So expecting them to answer truthfully in order to gain a diagnosis is inherently flawed. So he developed a way of, there's also interview, but it's also based on records and based on interviewing people who knew them as children, knew them in life, and using that information. And often it takes 6 to 8 hours to complete one of these. And only someone trained in the technique can actually do it. But then you reach very, reproducible results on diagnosis.
It's interesting because, I call the show the Bottom Up Show, and bottom up is about how we're connected to other people in many ways. Mm-hmm. And what you're describing is a bottom-up way of assessing a person by looking at how all the people connected to them describe them, right?
Right, exactly. And the person themselves, because oftentimes they will reveal about themselves even without meaning to.
Okay. So what's the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath, according to you?
So according to me, and the reason that I do this is that a lot of the public, when they hear the word psychopath, they get it confused with psychosis, with psycho, with psychotic. And that is not the same as psychopath. So, psychopath, someone without empathy or a conscience. To technically reach the diagnosis of psychopath, you have to have a score of 30 out of 40 or greater on the PCLR test. So they've modified it during the training. They've actually now have like high and moderate and mild because the score is 0 to 40. Technically a 30 or greater is psychopath, but most people, we're talking the empathetic majority, almost everybody scores a 5 or less. So that means if you score a 15, you have 3 times the average characteristics of a normal person. That means that you are not quite the same as everyone around you. It means that the way your brain is wired is not the norm. You are not neurotypical. So, and they do describe it. They call it psychopath light. Some people say it's a successful psychopath, and they don't want to use the word sociopath. Sociopath began to be in favor when people would say, okay, a psychopath is born that way and a sociopath is made that way from environment.
Yeah, I've heard that a number of places. I don't buy that either.
Well, it's all the above. Basically, it's sociopath. There's definitely a genetic component. Whether it's sociopath or psychopath, these people have a genetic predisposition to be born this way. Then environment helps determine how much these genes are expressed.
All right. So, if you want to read a book that gets into the genetics of it, James Fallon wrote a book. What was the name of his book?
What was it? It was Inside the Mind of a Psychopath.
Yeah. And he's a neuroscientist who discovered that his brain maps looked just like psychopaths, and he realized that
the psychopath inside.
Yeah. And so that's the genetics. And right. What you're also describing is the environment has an effect on the epigenetics, which is basically how much the genetics is expressed.
Right. And so then, using the general definition that sociopaths are environmentally focused, so maybe sociopaths are not as far on the spectrum So if there's a sociopath spectrum, if like we're going on the scale from 15 to 40, then the people near 15, maybe they had better childhoods. Maybe they had less verbal or physical abuse. Maybe they had better nutrition. Maybe they were in an Eastern society instead of a Western society. But, you know, maybe it's environment that made them not be as far on the scale.
You know, I did an exercise once. I took a look at the PCLR, and then I looked at Barack Obama. And actually, I did it because I did an interview with, at the time, the president of the Society for the Study of Psychopathy. And he described how there was a study that looked at all the presidents.
There is.
And they scored them.
Uh-huh.
And they all scored way more than 5. And if I recall, Obama scored more than 15. And I think most...
Obama wasn't in it. That it actually cut off with Bill Clinton.
Okay, so I did it. I used my assessment of him. And I'm wondering... Pardon me?
Dr. Hare would not be happy with that.
Yeah, because I'm not trained. I realized that. It was a journal... I don't know what you'd call it. Not journalistic is probably not the right word, but I just played around with the idea. Mm-hmm. And but that study found that presidents come out pretty high. And so what's your take on that?
I think it's a problem. And I think it doesn't have to do with Democrats or Republicans, but our politicians are very, very likely to be on the sociopath scale.
Well, okay, now let's talk about that scale. You've mentioned in your book this sociopath scale. And so you're basically saying 5 is what the score is for the average person?
Yep.
What percentage of the population have a 5 or less?
I mean, 90%.
90%, really? Yep. Okay.
I mean, people argue on whether it's 1 and 4% to 10% on the sociopath spectrum. I mean, as far as scoring, 15 to 40.
Okay.
People who score a 30 or above, the people that, in my definitions would be a psychopath, they actually do have different structural features in their brains. So, I mean, on sociopaths, they could see different functional studies, but on the psychopaths, I mean, they're actually different sizes. I mean, they actually have, it's not, you could look at it without even functional analysis to see that their brains are different.
And this is how Fallon figured out that he was a psychopath, because he was doing these MRIs of criminals' brains, and then he looked at his MRI and he figured out he looked just like them.
Yeah, and technically he's not a psychopath because he doesn't score a 30 or above. And technically he has bipolar, which eliminates him from having the diagnosis at all.
Oh, really? That's something I'd never heard about. What's the story with that?
Well, they have exclusion criteria. So if you have, schizophrenia, bipolar, things like that, then you don't even get to use the scale.
What else besides schizophrenia and bipolar? Anything else?
Under substance abuse. So sociopaths and psychopaths are known to, they have lots of different addictions, sex, drugs, alcohol. But under the influence of a substance, even people who are, brain-wise, neurotypical can behave psychopathically.
Okay. But they're not psychopaths, though, because the
substances, it's kind of a chicken and egg type situation, because a lot of psychopaths are addicts. So, and lots of them will use that because they love to play the victim card and make you feel sorry for them. And so they blame it on the substance. It's my addiction. It's the disease, but they still don't have the capacity for empathy or conscience. So the difference is some addicts, when they get clean, they do have empathy and conscience, and psychopaths never do.
Okay. So it's a little scary, because I think you're on a slippery slope when you start saying 15% is sociopath, 30% is psychopath. If somebody has 10%, then that means they have twice as many characteristics. Why not include them?
Well, my whole point is I'm not trying to label. I'm not trying to, all I'm saying is, look, and I've developed a spotting tool with using the acronym GLIMPS behind the mask. And that lists the 20 most common character traits of sociopaths and psychopaths. Not because I want everybody to have a clipboard and for them to be making diagnoses and to point fingers and this, that, and the other, but because if you are aware of the character traits, you don't need to label them. You just need to change how you interact with them. You need to be aware of, are they lying to me? Are they suspect? Are they manipulating me? Are they trying to get me to do things that are not in my own best interest?
And if they are a psychopath, then the answer to all of those are probably yes.
Correct.
Okay. So glimpse, any chance you can share that with my listeners and viewers, and I could post it to the opednews.com site?
It's on my website for free. It's at NicoleKellyMD.com.
Okay. Very good. Is it on the front page, or do they have to go somewhere else?
On the front page, and you click on the link, and it'll take you to it.
Great. Now, your subtitle says protect yourself from psychopaths, sociopaths, and sexopaths.
Yep. And there's a slippery slope. So that is a term that is mediagenic for what I believe is the fundamental medical condition behind what we're seeing in the Me Too movement that nobody's talking about. I mean, the reason that people like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby treat women like objects is because they have no conscience and no empathy. Sociopaths are behind many of the horrible things that keep coming out on a daily basis of sexual predators.
So what's a sexopath?
So a sexopath is a sociopath or a psychopath with a sex addiction.
And tell me more. Keep going.
So, they often are in positions of power and use their positions of power to manipulate and control others in order to get what they want, including sexual gratification.
Now, you've described the person who stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from you as a sexopath.
Yes.
Talk about that person and what your connection was.
So she was a nurse who worked for me. She's very charming, very charismatic. She was the popular girl. She was the one who had a whole group of people who followed her around like puppy dogs. She has the ability to sell ice to an Eskimo. She can put a spin on anything and convince you to convince me to hand over the business side of my medical practice. I mean, I never really liked the business side anyway. My favorite part is talking to the patients and talking to the families. And she convinced me, she can take it to the next level. She's going to do all these wonderful things and make everything happen. And I wanted to believe her. I mean, she's very exciting. My life was more exciting with her in it. I mean, she made everything, just seem like there was no end to more excitement. And as she told me all of her crazy stories, which was a huge red flag. I mean, I should have realized this is not a person I need to be hanging out with.
What kind of stories?
About Ashley Madison, about all the people that she was dating on the site. About
cheating on her husband.
Yes. Yep.
Why didn't you take that as a warning?
Well, I was trying to be non-judgmental. I mean, I kept telling her that I have a truth thing. I don't like the cheating. The cheating side of it, bothers me. I mean, there are other people involved. But, I tried to just accept her for who she was and encourage her to come clean with her husband. And we always discussed that
she was lying to her husband and her husband had no idea.
She always thought that maybe he did, but she didn't want to find out.
Okay. So what advice do you have for somebody? How do you know if you're in a relationship with a psychopath, sociopath, or sexopath?
I mean, one of the most important things is to notice the inconsistencies. There were so many red flags. There were so many, lies that I caught her in, but because I wanted to believe she was my friend, which is another thing. She kept telling me, I'm such a loyal friend to you. I'm the most loyal friend you'll ever have. If somebody keeps telling you how loyal a friend they are, you need to wonder about that, because loyal friends don't need to tell you that. But if you're catching someone in lies and inconsistencies, another clue is they often think very highly of themselves. And this is an important point too, is that all sociopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are sociopaths.
Right.
So, and then they'll flip too, because they'll play the victim card. They want you to feel sorry for them. But then in the next moment, they're back to thinking that, they're better than God.
What about gaslighting? That's a term that's been coming up a lot lately. Where does that fit in with this group?
So I describe a sexopath love cycle. So there are 3 stages to the love cycle. The first is idealized, where you feel like you have just met your soulmate. This is the most amazing person you couldn't even made up someone as wonderful as this person is. And they're basically figuring out exactly who do you want, and they're putting on the mask to be that perfect person. Unfortunately, one of the biggest red flags that you might be involved with a sociopath, psychopath, or sexopath is thinking you found your soulmate. So the first stage is amazing, but then the next stage begins the devalue stage. And this is where the lie starts creeping up. A lot of them describe this as sort of a training stage, where they're trying to teach you how to be who they want you to be. And oftentimes they're criticizing all the relationships they had in the past, which is another clue. If all their past relationships, the other person was always to blame, because sociopaths never accept blame. And then they were all crazy. They were all in the sociopath. It's always like, oh, poor me. I was in this horrible relationship. But then sexopaths especially are always on the prowl for the next sexual victim. So even though they have you on the line, they're already looking for other people and may probably have other people already on the line. They'll have multiple relationships going on at the same time using deception. And then they make you feel crazy for it. They'll make you post things on social media that they know you're going to see, and to try to make you feel jealous. And then when you have a reaction, then turn the tables and make you feel guilty for your reaction. When in reality, you were probably right. In fact, some of their lies are so blatant that you think, how can that possibly, it must be true, because why would they be so stupid to make up such a stupid lie? So you reach a point where you no longer trust yourself on what you see and what you know, because they are constantly lying to you.
Okay, so the first stage is to become your perfect person.
Mm-hmm. Then they devalue you.
Then the second stage is they devalue you. What's the third stage?
It's discard.
It's
so
what?
Once they have their discard. Once they have their next, and often they'll do it in a very cruel, totally out of the blue sort of way. In fact, as I talk to more people about this, they're often telling me that, about the one that got away. And once we talk about it, they realize, oh, wow, the one that got away was actually a sociopath. Lots of women feel so guilty that here, this guy that they thought was the perfect guy, they had the perfect relationship, all of a sudden he dumps her out of the blue. She has no idea why. He's gone. He's completely different. What happened? And she blames herself. She thinks, I let my perfect soulmate get away. I don't even know what I did wrong. And then as we discuss it, they realize, oh, wow, he was a sociopath. He was an illusion the whole time.
Interesting. Now you talk about women because more sociopaths and psychopaths are male than female, right?
3-to-1 ratio.
3-to-1 ratio. Okay. But let's get into the gaslighting a little bit. That sounds like what happens in the second stage, in the devalue stage. Describe what gaslighting is and how they use it.
Well, it's a way to make you question everything that you know. They'll In fact, my ex-friend did this. I mean, basically was caught in bed with another person and then just denies it, even though they were caught. I mean, it was, and then just tells you that what you saw isn't real. And just makes you think that you can't trust your own senses. And lots of times too, sociopaths will, it's kind of a hot cold sort of situation where they start being mean and belittling you in front of others and making you feel bad about yourself, where you start having no self-esteem anymore and no self-confidence. And then you keep waiting, they'll give a little bitty crumb of being nice and sweet again that reminds you of the idealized phase, which you so long for. You want that to come back. Where did that go? That it keeps you in this loop. Often domestic violence cycles are like this, where it's, you know, gets really, really bad, but then if the person tries to pull away or go away, then, I mean, sociopaths and psychopaths are actually known to be stalkers. I mean, that can, if you decide to leave first, they'll think you back until they get you. In fact, Ted Bundy did the same thing with the woman who dumped him. He then went through elaborate means to then get her back, propose to her, and then dump her, just so that he could show that he had the power and the control to dump her back.
And we're going to talk about power and control in just a minute. But first, a brief show ID. Now, for the radio show, I add a bumper. So right now, we're just going to pause for 10 seconds so I can find it when I'm doing my audio editing. And my guest for this show is Jean Leslie. My guest for this show is Jean Leslie, MD, board-certified physician and a hospice geriatrician. And she's the author of the book, Charming Cheaters, Protect Yourself from the Sociopaths, Psychopaths, and Sexopaths in Your Life. So power and control. Talk about where that fits into the psychopath, sociopath, sexopath equation.
So if you think about it, most of us with empathy, we spend a whole lot of time thinking about, you know, are we doing enough for others? Are our loved ones okay? Are our kids okay? Or, you know, what are they thinking about us? I mean, we spend a whole bunch of time thinking about things related to our empathy. Well, sociopaths and psychopaths don't have that. They don't have that empathy, which means there's a lot of extra time in their brains that often is filled with seeking power and control. For them, the whole world is a game, and we are their pawns to manipulate. Every single time they meet another person, they are immediately assessing for vulnerabilities. It's a matter of figuring out, how can I push the buttons of this person to get out what I want from them to benefit me?
You know, it makes me think of a cat with a mouse. Absolutely. Knocking the little mouse around and playing with it, and then finally eating it.
And what's so important about that too is the cat doesn't dislike the mouse. So many victims I meet are all like, how could they do this? Why did they do this to me? It wasn't personal. I mean, a cat just hunts a mouse because that's what a cat does. Well,
but a cat ends up eating the mouse. I mean, I don't think cats just do it for entertainment. Do they?
Some do, but I mean, you know, that for the sociopaths and the psychopaths, I mean, you know, the manipulation and total control, I mean, that's their hunt, that's their kill. I mean, that's what they're looking for.
I've always seen sociopaths and psychopaths as predators.
Yes.
And
in fact, they have a predatory stare, which if you see it, it's very, you won't forget it. I mean,
when I interviewed the pseudonymous author of Diary of a Sociopath, who was actually a psychopath because she took the hair test and came out that way.
Oh, that's Emmy Thomas?
Pardon me?
Emmy Thomas?
Yeah, that's the pseudonym name. Yeah. I asked her, how do you tell who is a psychopath or a sociopath? And she said, they look like they're going to have you for lunch when they're looking at you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they've got that predatory stare.
Right. And if you think about it, I mean, there is an evolutionary reason for, psychopaths and sociopaths. I mean, in tribal societies, granted, everybody would know who they were, but, when you need someone to go protect the tribe and, war and this sort of thing, that's when they would shine. That's when, because they make good warriors.
Now, I've never heard that before.
It's actually a thought for why some nutritional deficiencies might be related to increased gene expression. Because if you think in tribal societies, when there was less food around, then having more genes expressed of psychopaths would increase your ability for the tribe to go out and, go mess up another tribe to get more resources.
Now, my learning about anthropology is that tribes are a more recent phenomenon, that for most of human existence, tribes didn't exist just like civilization didn't exist. Most of the time, humans lived in hunter-gatherer bands, smaller groups. And I've asked other people who work with this population how they would handle psychopaths and sociopaths. And basically, let's say if it was a far northern group living in where there's lots of glaciers and snow and ice, the answer was put the person out on an ice floe and basically either ban them or kill them.
Right.
So I'm not sure I'm buying your helpful because they're warriors theory. I think warriors have courage and they care about people in who they are defending. I think you got a whole different kind of a person. Now, so let's talk a little bit about narcissists, because every psychopath or sociopath is a narcissist.
Yes.
But not every narcissist is a psychopath. So what makes a difference between them?
So the difference is some narcissists can actually have empathy. So they'll actually present to therapy, and they end up alienating everybody because of their huge ego, and they're unhappy about it. It causes functional distress in their life because their ego makes it so that they can't have friends, they don't have good relationships, and they want that. The difference with the sociopath or psychopath is if you don't like them, that's on you. They don't care. There's obviously something wrong with you that you don't recognize their superiority.
I think, though, that there still is an issue of empathy and compassion and caring among narcissists, too, Correct. But not to the extent.
Not to the extent. And some have actually thought that, with the whole spectrum concept, that, if there's a continuum, that the narcissist may be coming before the sociopaths to the psychopaths.
Okay. Are among the psychopaths, the ones that pass that 30-point range, are there characteristics that tend to show up more than with sociopaths?
They have less impulse control, usually. They're much more likely to be in jail. So it's estimated 15 to 25% of prisoners are psychopaths. So it's not always, they tend to be more violent. They tend to not be able to wear their mask as well to fit into society. Those aren't hard and fast rules because they're sociopaths who are, with lower IQs, who don't have impulse control and who end up in jail. But in general, psychopaths tend to have lower IQ, less impulse control, and more likely to be incarcerated.
All right. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that one too, because I think the lower IQ ones with the less impulse control are the ones who end up in jail.
Right.
I think the smart ones end up running mega churches, becoming politicians, becoming CEOs.
Right. But see, the thing is, we haven't been able to do a PCLR on them. Are they sociopaths? Are they psychopaths? Doesn't matter. That's my point in that.
It doesn't matter?
Well, putting the label on sociopath versus psychopath, they're on the spectrum. We need to be watching out and not putting them in control.
I did an interview with a guy who wrote the book on corporate psychopaths.
Oh, great.
And, he basically said that there are some companies that look for them because they can make great salespeople, because they have the charisma. Charisma is another factor in psychopathy and sociopathy that is very powerful. And that's one of the other reasons why the women get into these relationships with guys who they think it was their ideal relationship. And it's like the lure that entraps them.
Right.
Yeah. So what do you advise people to do?
I mean, there are different levels of trust. So, lots of people are like, well, this just means I can't trust anyone. That's not true. I mean, that doesn't even fit to our empathetic souls, that we can't trust anyone. I mean, we still can be kind to a stranger, to someone on the street, but a deeper level of trust must be earned. I mean, that is something that you don't give out lightly. That's something that takes time and getting to know somebody. So if someone is pressuring you to do something that you're not comfortable to do, don't do it. In all likelihood, it's not in your best interest if they're pressuring you to do it.
Did that nurse who stole from you pressure you to do things?
Yeah. Every single objection I had, she had a ready-made answer. She always had the perfect solution to everything, I would come up with.
Okay. And how would you have handled things differently now?
I think one of the most important things that we can do is to question our first impressions. So sociopaths and psychopaths make fantastic first impressions. They're very charismatic. I mean, they're bigger than life, seem, not always, but often, I mean, they are just they're people you want to like. And then afterwards, there'll be clues that what we first saw was inaccurate. We'll see inconsistencies or lies or a way that they act that is not consistent with that first impression of who we think they are. But then we make excuses because we so want our first impression to be right. But then we never question because we so want the illusion to be real.
How do people get around? I mean, that's a hard thing to do. If you meet somebody and you want to meet somebody and you find somebody who looks great, and then you start seeing inconsistencies. Are there other clues besides inconsistencies?
I mean, they're definitely, if they're being unreliable, if you're, look at how they treat people that they don't have an immediate gain from. I mean, look how they treat cashiers or how they treat waiters. I mean, how do they interact with people that there isn't some direct reason they want to control or manipulate them? And oftentimes they tend to be danger seekers, they're thrill seekers, they hate to be bored. So, I mean, because they're not thinking about empathetic things like the rest of us. Their biggest fear is getting bored. So oftentimes that's why, they're into addictions. That's why lots of times they do all sorts of thrill-seeking things, Oftentimes hollow emotions is a clue too. So when they're on and they're presenting to you something they prepared and they're trying to manipulate and control you at that moment, then they can be animated because they're faking the emotions. They're showing you what they've practiced to show the emotions. But when they're not on, that's often, they'll be kind of monotone. They'll be kind of cold and callous. Look for times when they're telling a story and their expression and emotion doesn't fit the story. Like one example I have is a woman who was telling a story about her daughter who ran over a dog. And she was telling the story very matter of fact. And then she realized the people she was telling the story to were very concerned about the dog. I watched her face then think about, oh, they want me to care about the dog. And so then her face changed as then she told about the dog. Like I watched it happen where she realized, oh, I need to fake empathy now. So those are little things. And oftentimes you can see it best when they're talking to someone else. So when they're not focused on you, is a good time to observe what they're doing. And are they acting differently in one group from another? Like the real Nashville Kitty had a different persona for every different person that she hung out with. I remember commenting on that. Like with her husband, she was a very different person than she was with me or than she was with a different friend.
How?
Well, with me, she's all like, oh, I'm tough, I'm this, I'm that. And then with her husband, she was much more demure and, placating to him. And I mean, it was very much so a different sort of personality that I should have realized something was up, but made excuses for her instead.
How long was she playing you?
I mean, it was several years.
Several years before you figured it out.
Yep. And really, I didn't even figure it out until I started writing the stories. And that's when I started realizing, wow, she does not think like everybody else. Because, I mean, we learned about psychopaths in medical school. But the way it's described is, I mean, the person who's setting fires, torturing animals, lettered tattoos on their hands. This was the picture. We're thinking more, Hannibal Lecter serial killer type of thing. And that's what the general public is thinking too. But usually, not always, but nonviolent sociopath, we didn't talk about that at all. I mean, that is in no way stressed in medical school. It's not something that most medical professionals even know about or would know how to even suspect. So it really opened up a whole new world to me of understanding that, wow, there's an entire subset of people that their brains do not work like mine. Their perception of reality is not the same. I mean, it's not a matter of good, evil, bad, this and that. It's not about judgment. They fundamentally are different with a different perception of reality.
Now, if I recall, one of the neurobiological aspects is associated with empathy, which is maybe mirror neuron functioning. Another is genetics related to thrill seeking or aggressive. Another is aggressiveness. I kind of remember that there were a whole bunch of them. Fallon, in his book, talked about these different, they're like at least 40 or 50 different genes that all can contribute to different aspects of adding up to being a sociopath or psychopath. So I'm curious, I think that President Trump is at least a narcissist and probably a psychopath. Have you looked at his score? Done anything? I mean, it's not. I know that psychiatrists are not supposed to do that, but a whole bunch of them have.
Right. I mean,
because it's a national emergency, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Trump scores the highest, from observational. He obviously has not undergone the official testing because he wouldn't allow it. But he and Bill Clinton actually are the highest scorers of the presidents.
Okay. And what characteristics of his are signs that he is he fits under psychopath or sociopath?
I don't know. I haven't examined him and really.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. But what are some of his characteristics that would indicate that he's one or the other?
Okay. So, not one or the other, that he's on the spectrum.
He's on the spectrum. He's over 15 on the PCL scale.
Absolutely. Okay. I would be absolutely shocked if he underwent official testing and did not score at least a 15. So, he's a pathological liar, multiple lies every single day, can be fact checked. He has no guilt or remorse. He has multiple relationships at the same time using deception. He definitely thinks life is a game In fact, it's very interesting to listen to his language. Just the recent things where, you know, he was calling the woman who lost her race a loser. I mean, for him, it's winning, it's losing, you know, it's about getting what he wants at all cost, regardless of how it affects others. I mean, he definitely seems to lack empathy. I mean, the whole, you know, hurricane, you know, whose boat is this anyway? I mean, where he just doesn't seem to understand how others would feel in a situation. He definitely doesn't think that rules apply to him. And if the rule is inconvenient, he wishes to change it. He definitely feels entitled. He's very glib. He does not show fear or worry. I mean, he never admits blame, too. It's always someone else's fault. He's using his power to manipulate others. A lot of the recent stuff coming out that he, when they described him acting like a mob boss, where it's about loyalty to me. You're either on my side or you're not. And it's not about the country. It's about loyal to him, because that is the most important thing to him. I mean, everyone does describe him as being very charming when you meet him. He very much so is able to be charismatic in the proper situation. In a lot of ways, he has duped half the nation. And it's not because they're stupid. It's because they want to believe. That's the thing that I'm finding over and over again, is that people aren't duped by sociopaths and psychopaths because they're stupid, but they want to believe that the illusion is true. I mean, I'm in a red state. I mean, I work every single day with people who are very strong Trump supporters, and it's not because they're idiots. It's because he represents hope to them. They want to believe that he really is going to make their lives better. See, what they don't realize is that he is not capable of caring for them. As a sociopath or psychopath, the only thing that truly matters to him is himself.
Are there any other items on that list that you've been listing here?
He's definitely about control, about conquest. When someone doesn't do what he wants, he discards them. And you can look at the, idealize, devalue, and discard pattern. Not only in romantic relationships, but also in business and with the people who work for him. He's also been described to have illogical fits of rage over very trivial things, which is very common in the psychopath. They'll completely blow up over something that you don't even think warrants that. And then 5 minutes later, they're acting like it didn't happen, which is also a form of control, because when they have these illogical fits of rage, everyone walks on eggshells around them. And they describe that, the people who work for him are afraid to approach him because they don't want to be the messenger who's going to be killed.
Did you hit all 20 of them?
Well, let's see. Some of them I don't specifically know.
Like which ones?
Well, does he do the sexopath love cycle? So I don't know one of his, relationships. We know that he has been unfaithful, and that he's had multiple relationships at once, and that he's willing to, pay people off in order for it not to come out, because, even though that's breaking the rules, he doesn't, he feels that money can get rid of that. He's definitely very egotistical and narcissistic. Yep, we're hitting, he kind of is a sociopathic poster child.
Okay, so I'm going to take another break, and then we're going to talk about how do you end a relationship with one of these people. So check out opednews.com/podcasts to have access to all of the interviews that I've ever done, or iTunes. You can download the more recent ones, the last 100, or also there are the more recent ones at SoundCloud as well. And pause for 10 seconds now. And my guest for this show is Jean Leslie, MD, board-certified physician, and the author of the book, Charming Cheaters, Protect Yourself from the Sociopaths, Psychopaths, and Sexopaths in Your Life. So we've been talking about these unpleasant people. How do people in relationships with them deal with them? How do you end a relationship with one if you're in a romantic relationship, if you're married to one? And how do you deal with someone if you work with them and you can't stop the relationship?
Right. And that's a very important question, because a lot of people do it incorrectly and put themselves in danger by doing it incorrectly. So if you're in a romantic relationship with a sociopath, and this is actually advice from Emmy Thomas, who is sociopathworld.com, the one who has the pseudonym that you mentioned before, who is a sociopath, which is a fascinating site. Just reading what the sociopaths say and understanding what they think. But the best way to get out of a relationship with a sociopath is to let them think it's their idea. So if you take control, if you one thing you never want to do is point out to them that they're a sociopath or psychopath. That is not going to end well. That they are not going to believe you anyway, because they're so full of themselves. And even if part of them does believe it, they're not going to show that. But it's just going to end up wrath on you. And sociopaths are very vengeful. They will go, they don't have empathy to occupy their mind helping others. Thinking about revenge is something they will spend lots and lots of time doing. And if you get on their, enemy list, you're asking for danger. So some of the things that Emmy Thomas said was, stop bathing. Start being very, very clingy and emotional, and start, wanting more time, and do things that will irritate the sociopath to a point that they will reach the discard phase, which I thought was very interesting.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. So let me ask you a question. Will a narcissist exact revenge? Is that something that you would also see in a narcissist, or does that kind of draw the line on making a person a sociopath or psychopath?
It's definitely narcissistic dependent. Person dependent. I would say some would and some wouldn't.
Okay, so that's not something that's going to indicate them. I got into this because publishing a website that sees 150 to 800,000 unique visitors a month. I get my share of people with all kinds of psychiatric issues. And, if you just go by the 1% psychopaths, that's, 1,500 to 12,000 a month. And I've had my share of trolls. And I kind of concluded that it was more at first I thought they were psychopaths, but I've kind of concluded that they're narcissists. They're the ones who submit an article and it gets rejected for whatever reason, and they come back and say, this is the article that's going to save the world. How dare you? And it's a challenge. How about if you work with somebody? We just talked about the romantic side. So how about if you work with somebody? Now, I've gotten pretty good at recognizing them, and I can basically say, sorry, this isn't going to work. Please try somewhere else. And I don't get into labeling or anything. It's just short and sweet, goodbye. But if you have a job and your boss is one, or one of your coworkers is one, or an employee is one, what do you do then?
So, sociopaths and psychopaths have a huge Achilles heel, which is they can't tell the same lie to everybody. So if empathetic people talk to each other, then we can expose their lies. It's very tricky in a business situation Because, I mean, oftentimes if you start, you never want to throw around words like sociopath or psychopath, because the way our society is set up now, that makes you look crazy. But one of the best things you can do is document. Write everything down. This is actually good in a romantic relationship as well. Write everything down, because when you're going to court, when you're going to, your boss's boss, having everything written down is very important.
Like what? What would you write down?
Inconsistencies, things they say, lies they do, things they messed up on, how they're not doing their job. Because one thing is, sociopaths like to brag about how wonderful they are, but in reality, they're often quite sloppy and don't really do a good job. They love the glory, but they don't like the work. So documenting everything they're not doing, everything they're saying, how they love to pit people, one group against each other. That's what's happening in America now. So we don't notice what the actual problem is because we're fighting with each other. They just love to sit back and see what their chaos creation causes. So going to your boss's boss is also a good idea, and to do it early.
So if you're saying if your boss is a psychopath or a sociopath, go to your
boss's boss.
Go to the boss's
just
boss.
Make sure that you've done it beforehand, because they will already be working their boss to, paint the picture in their own favor.
What do you mean do it beforehand? I'm not clear what you're saying there.
Before everything blows up and the sociopath has already, targeted you and made you look like you're the enemy, you're the crazy person, because that's often their MO, is to create this picture where anyone who recognizes them for who they are, they target to try to get rid of them.
Okay. So I've written that I think that there should be some kind of a law that protects us against sociopaths and psychopaths. If you're a sexual predator, there are laws against you and what you can do and where you can even live.
Yep.
And I think the same thing should happen with psychopaths and sociopaths. And I think that they are a danger to society, and they are predators. And I also think, unfortunately, that our culture, our civilization has enabled them, empowered them, and given them more opportunity than ever before in the history of the human race. I do believe what I was told before, that indigenous cultures would more likely ban them or kill them.
Right.
So what do you think?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think it's an interesting idea, except that the people who would set that in motion are the people in charge who don't want that in motion. But
because they are often
the people, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems with our world today, is that sociopaths and psychopaths are running it. They are not looking out for the common good. They are looking out for their own self-interest at the detriment of everyone else. If empathetic people were in charge, our world would be a completely different place.
Wow.
I mean, how different would our world be if politicians were required to get PET scans before we elected them?
Let alone release their tax returns. So PET scans can identify these people?
No, I mean, no, technically no. I mean, you could see, just like James Fallon. So James Fallon technically doesn't qualify as a psychopath because he doesn't score high enough on the PCLR scale and this type of thing. And I mean, he does follow a set of morals. And I mean, just because you have these things on the scans, it's a very slippery slope if we start saying, you are this because of your scan. But in reality, we can do different EEGs, different functional MRIs, PET scans, and there are certain things that they cannot fake. I mean, people who get turned on by violent images is something that you can see it on the scan. That's someone we don't want running our government. I mean, that's someone we don't want, heading the church.
All right. And we need to wrap with that. One last time, my guest has been Jean Leslie, the author of Protect Yourself from the Sociopaths, Psychopaths, and Sexopaths in Your Life. Her website is using her pseudonym, NicoleKelly.md.com. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks.